Hey going guys, it's l0lergy here and welcome to the first video of this series. For those of you who don't know me, my name's l0lergy. As I said at the start, I'm a small upcoming YouTuber just trying to make a name for myself. For those of you who do follow, as you would have seen in previous videos, I mentioned that I was going to do something like this, maybe make an opinion piece sort of video every few weeks or a month, or depending if something interesting happens, or generally if I just think of something interesting to talk about. So with the introductions out of the way, we'll get into it. This video will be about why Jagex make the decisions they do. And what I mean by that is more focused and orientated about their financial situation and why they make sort of decisions based around pay to win or not pay to win or anything like that. Just to get this out of the way though, this is an opinion piece. This is my thoughts on the situation. People's opinions can vary. I'm totally happy for that and understand all of that. So don't take this as a personal insult if something you think of disaligns or doesn't agree with what I say. So just keep that in mind throughout the video, guys. So let's get into it. So for you guys to really understand in depth what I'm talking about here, I'm going to have to paint a little background picture for you, some sort of history into Jagex, how it is as a company now and how it was, because this does greatly affect a lot of their decision making that they make nowadays. So back in the day when Paul and Andrew Gow first designed Jagex, they were the primary shareholders in the company. The company was privately owned, which means outside investors who wanted to give them their money had to get consent from the board of directors at Jagex, whereas publicly owned public people could just give broker money and they could buy it for them. So they had to have direct consent and permission voted by the board of directors. So in 2005, a company called Insight Venture Partners made an investment in Jagex. They paid them a large proportion of money so they could fund Jagex because Jagex were all self-sufficient back in the day. They ran off their own profits. What this means is these Insight Venture Partners can give them some money, assuming they're going to profit, and Jagex will profit and make their money back and everyone's happy. Woo, that's the idea of it anyway. In late 2009, Andrew and Paul Gower stepped down as board of directors of Jagex, the original creators. And at that time, Insight Venture Partners went from having a 35% stake in the company to a 55% stake, which now made them the controlling interest in the company, which now means that they have direct decision making if they needed over any decision made throughout Jagex. And the CEO that was appointed at the time would be directly related to them and have to give feedback to them. It's sort of akin to the British monarchy, how they have a royal family which does oversee every country in the Commonwealth. Hypothetically, for example, Australia, where I'm from, is a country of the Commonwealth that sits and floats on an island by itself. Realistically, nowadays, if the Queen or a monarchy wanted to do anything, Australia would just tell her to fuck off because it's a new generation. We don't operate like that anymore. But it's sort of similar to Jagex, how venture partners own the company, but they don't really do a whole lot. They just want to see dollars at the end of the day, and if they see dollars, they're happy. They won't intervene. So that's just a bit of a background into Jagex at the moment. As I said, they're primarily owned by Insight Venture Partners and other shareholders. Small ones like the Rain Group and Spectrum Equality investors will have small stakes. Then there'll be like the CEO and other small individuals. Probably Andrew and Paul Gower might still own a stake in the company, but they're not the primary shareholder. At the end of the day, the primary shareholder gets all the decision making. So now that Jagex is owned by an investment company, this investment company would have sort of expectations that Jagex would need to meet to keep them happy. This investment company wouldn't really have any sort of decision making involved in the production of games, because I'm only going to assume that Insight Venture Partners, purely by their name, have no knowledge and no know-how on how to make games. They'd be purely business orientated and would give Jagex money and hope that they got more out. It's as simple as that. But with that though, them being the largest shareholder in the company would have expectations and criteria they'd want them to meet. They'd push Jagex and probably pressure them to say, we want this profit in this time, or we want this done, we want this in this, we want this Squeal of Fortune idea implemented because that brings us more money. We want the subscription-based numbers to go up because this brings us more money. That's the primary understanding behind it all. They are a business, they need to profit. They have pressure from outside investors to return money back to the people that gave them money in the first place. That's how it works in the real world, and that's how it works with just about every single company. However, with that, there are pros and there are cons, advantages and disadvantages, and I'll briefly run over them in this video for you. So we'll start with the advantages and the pros first, I guess. The most obvious is going to be they're going to make more money. If they have an outside investment company pressuring them or giving them expectations or lines to meet with profit, then Jagex themselves internally are going to have to figure out new and innovative ways to produce this money. The obvious one that comes to mind is the Squeal of Fortune. Some would argue that they have sort of crossed the line with that, some wouldn't. Who knows? It's up for debate. I'll talk about that later in the video because we could be here all day talking about whether they've crossed the line with that. With that and the more money comes a long-term future. So if Jagex themselves are having good turnover and producing more profits, then they're obviously going to be able to be around for longer. They're going to have more money to deal with new projects, looking to invest elsewhere. You know, they might think about having a next gen RuneScape, which I can tell you now would cost an absolute bucket load of money to fund with the current way the market's going at the moment. Games are really underestimated, like World of Warcraft in 2004 when it came out, cost $80 million to make. That was, 10 years ago. Wow, that makes me feel quite old. Another good thing is it keeps the shareholders happy. If their primary investors seeing dollar signs in his eye, he's not going to bug them. He's not going to nag them. They're happy. Everyone's happy. Maybe except not the players. Sometimes when they release things like Silverhawk boots, as we all seen in the Reddit and other places around the internet. But as for the most part, everyone's happy. So with the good comes the bad, as every RuneScape player would know. Loot and PKing. But anyway, let's get into the negatives of this sort of business model. So probably the biggest one that a lot of companies would really need to consider, and I'm sure they do consider themselves, is a tarnished reputation. It's really hard to sell a product to someone new or to convince people to jump on board your ship if your ship's got holes in it and it's sinking. I'm not saying RuneScape are in that situation right now from a personal view. Their ship's floating and it's going along nice, but it has taken a few shots from a cannon along the way. More, actually, I don't like that analogy. I'll say shots in the foot. Um, Jagex of late have sort of created a bit of a controversial reputation for themselves over a few sort of decisions they've made. As I said, it's an opinion piece. Don't shoot me for saying that, but it doesn't take much to just have a look around the forums and you'll see things about microtransactions, Silverhawk boots, and other sort of decisions that this sort of mentality has brought into RuneScape. Another bad thing about that is it's hard to attract new players if you do have a tarnished reputation. So a lot of people do really underappreciate what it's like to look at RuneScape in a new pair of eyes. We've all been playing it for a long time, well most have. A lot of people are familiar and we've just come to accept these sort of things from Jagex. Like I said, it's not all doom and gloom, they haven't done everything bad, but I mean, we know and we understand that they are a company that needs to profit and they do want to make money, so they will make decisions at times orientated around that philosophy. But with that, if you're an outside player who's never heard of RuneScape before, and let's just say you've been in a dungeon for 20 years, you're like, oh, what's RuneScape? Let's have a look at that. They play RuneScape compared to playing another or other games out there. It might not be very appealing, and it's a lot harder for the player base to trust a company like that. Um, if you damage the reputation of your company, then players will have that mentality of that the sort of bandwagon pack horde mentality where, oh, they're coming out with a new update, it'll be more Squeal of Fortune stuff. Like, I'm not saying that's how it is now, but that's something they need to really consider about when they bring out these sort of updates. It's a fine line to tread, and as soon as you cross it, sort of ironically because they crossed it with boots, you know, see what I'm saying? But I think you wouldn't probably get any argument out of anyone watching this video that the Silverhawk boots sort of crossed the line. And that's a good example of what I mean by they need to balance it very fine about how they try to profiteer off that sort of system. To finish off this video, I'll talk about what they need to ensure that they do to make sure that their company stays profitable, their subscriber base stays happy, and they continuously generate revenue, which keeps everyone happy, those 3 points. They need to have a guy at the top of the food chain, CEO generally, who needs to make the right decisions. He needs to know when to tell people, no, that's a bad idea, and yes, that's a good idea. For example, Silverhawk boots. Someone should have said, no, that's a bad idea. I think they tried to balance the line to see what they could get away with when they made that decision, and I don't think there'd be any argument from a large majority of the people here that watch this video that would say that that was sort of over the top. They crossed the line a bit with that. That's one example. They need someone who knows when to say, nah, sort of that's enough. We don't want God swords on Grand Exchange for $50 and all that sort of good stuff. Another thing that they need to do is to make sure they listen to their player base. And I will give them credit here. This is something they do quite well. As much as people like to jump on the Jagex hate wagon for this, they actually do listen to their player base quite a bit. It doesn't take much to realize that. You go have a look around Reddit threads and the forums and stuff, and they do have mods actively communicating with members. And that doesn't happen as much as it does on bigger games. Like, for example, World of Warcraft has a ridiculous subscriber base, and it's theoretically impossible, really, unless they employ 1,000 people, to actively be involved in the community. And it doesn't take much for decisions and ideas from the community to get pushed up the food chain. I mean, you see these ninja requests that get put on Reddit all the time, and people listen to that. They do get implemented. You have a look at the patch notes, and people will put that in. That's what I like about Jagex, how there's fluidity in how ideas come from the bottom of the food chain to the top. So I do applaud them for that, and I give them quite a bit of credit for how they do that. Um, that's really the main things they need to focus on in the future. Just making sure there's a guy who can make right decisions about paying to win models and when not to put money in and when not to. Uh, and they need to listen to the community. So just to recap what we talked about in this video, I summarized Jagex as a company, the sort of business model, and how that business model really affects the decisions they make. The sort of advantages and disadvantages they have to this business model, and the things they sort of need to ensure that they do down the future to make sure their company stays sustainable, profitable, and their subscriber base stays happy. As I said at the start of the video, it was just an opinion piece. There wasn't really any point behind the video. There was no right or wrong. It was just a simple analytical assessment of how Jagex operates as a company and the sort of pros and cons to that. And you got to remember, guys, that no one's really perfect. People make mistakes, and Jagex himself have made a fair few mistakes. But with that does come good, and for the most part, I think Jagex would outweigh the bad with the good. That they've done pretty good, I think, over the last 15 years to stay where they are. It is a competitive market, and it's going to be even more harder for them to keep up. But they've done all right so far, and I do commend them for that. And with that, guys, this will be the end of the video. I know it sort of wasn't as structured as well as maybe I'd hoped, but hopefully I got some good points across, and some of the more lesser educated people sort of know what's going on now. So with that, guys, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good day.